G'day and welcome to this video about habitat restoration for helmeted honeyeater and Leadbeater's possum. My name is Casey and I'm the Yarra for Life coordinator for the Port Phillip and Western Port CMA. This video is going to give you an insight into the very cute but critically endangered helmeted honeyeater and lowland Leadbeater's possum. And we're also going to talk to you about habitat restoration and what you might be able to do on your land to support these threatened species. I'm really excited to have some experts with us today who are going to share their knowledge. To start off with, we're going to have Dr. Melanie Birchnell, who is going to talk to us about helmeted honeyeater. We've got Dr. Dan Harley, who's going to talk to us about the lowland Leadbeater's possum. And we've got Gai Gadsden from the Friends of the Helmeted Honeyeater, who's going to talk to us about her experiences with habitat restoration on private land. I'd like to acknowledge the many traditional owners of the land in which you might be watching this video from. I'd like to particularly acknowledge the Wurundjeri people, who are the traditional owners of the Yellingbo area, which is the current habitat of the helmeted honeyeater and the Leadbeater's possum. I'd particularly like to welcome and thank any Indigenous people or elders that may be watching this video today as well. So let's get this underway and I'll throw to Mel first.
Hi, I'm Mel and I'm Environmental Coordinator with the Friends of the Helmeted Honeyeater. I'm so pleased to be with you today to share the story of the critically endangered helmeted honeyeater and the ways in which we're working in partnerships to save this beautiful species from extinction. Historically, the range of the helmeted honeyeater was from Healesville and the Watts River in the north, down to the Bass River and Western Port Bay in the south, with an adjunct population further south, as far east as Ferntree Gully and as far west as Bunyip. Currently, the population is restricted to an area around Yellingbo in Melbourne's outer east, so there's been a significant contraction of range. The species was discovered by scientists in 1867, with specimens collected from Western Port and Bass River down in the south. On this same expedition, the scientists discovered the lowland Leadbeater's possum, or the Leadbeater's possum, and both species have contracted back to this area around Yellingbo and are coexisting in the Yellingbo location. Part of the reason for the contraction of helmeted honeyeaters and Leadbeater's possums from the area further south of Yellingbo was owing to some huge hydrological works that occurred in the Great Swamp. The Great Swamp was an area of swampland that was about 40,000 hectares in size, and when the early European settlers arrived, they looked out to that Great Swamp and saw some really positive opportunities for agriculture around that Great Swamp area, and 40,000 hectares of land that they could reclaim. So they set about an enormous drainage program where people from Melbourne were relocated out to work on the Great Swamp, and as part of their payment they were offered parcels of land to work on draining the Great Swamp, and that Great Swamp was drained over a period of around 50 years. So that change in hydrology through the Great Swamp saw a huge contraction of the types of vegetation, the types of plants that the helmeted honeyeater and the Leadbeater's possum prefer, and their habitat was contracted significantly. And we can see here in some of these historical photographs that there were really serious efforts to clear that swamp, and for those of us who drive anywhere near the Cooey-Rup swamp area around Lang Lang and Cooey-Rup, we can see that all of this vegetation has been completely removed. So we can see here a tramway going through the swamp and a gentleman being dwarfed by this swamp vegetation. And it continued through to 1947 and even a little later. And even now through the Great Swamp area, there are still constant efforts to try and keep the swamp at bay and for that agricultural land to be maintained. Of course, part of the historic drivers for loss of habitat fires, in particular the Ash Wednesday fires of 1983, which saw a lot of habitat around Cockatoo and Upper Beaconsfield being burnt out, which again contributed to a really significant contraction of what habitat was left. So by just prior to 1967, it was recognised that Yellingbo was one of the last strongholds of the helmeted honeyeater, so that decline had happened already by this point, and Yellingbo Nature Conservation Reserve was declared in 1967 in an effort to try and protect that last remaining population. By 1971, the Helmeted Honeyeater was declared the state emblem of Victoria, the avian or the bird state emblem of Victoria. And one of the reasons for this, not just because it had declined so significantly, but it's also the only bird in Victoria that only occurs in Victoria. So it was nominated as the bird emblem of Victoria. By 1989, there were less than 50 birds remaining in the wild, and they were all confined by this stage to the area south of Yellingbo. And it was agreed that action had to be taken to prevent an extinction. And at that point, a group of people banded together and formed the Friends of the Helmeted Honeyeater. And in the 30 years since, the Friends of the Helmeted Honeyeater have been committed to a range of activities to help support the survival of the Helmeted Honeyeater, including habitat restoration, community education, and advocacy. We've made huge changes and huge improvements in the extent of habitat for the Helmeted Honeyeater, but despite these efforts, the extent of decline for the Helmeted Honeyeater has been pushed to critically endangered on the IUCN Red List. The Helmeted Honeyeater has a quite specific habitat. It prefers swamp and riparian vegetation. And I have a short video here that will show you some of the features of the habitat, and there's a special guest appearance during the video, so keep your eyes peeled. So this is some core habitat for the Helmeted Honeyeater. We can see that there's a really dense shrub layer, and you might be able to spot in the ground story as well some sedges, and here comes the guest appearance. There's a little Helmeted Honeyeater that came to visit while I was videoing. You can see there's an overstory of manigum, Eucalyptus biminalis, the mountain swamp gum, Eucalyptus camphora, and the swamp gum, Eucalyptus ovata. We've also got a really fundamentally important shrub layer, which can consist of scented paperbark, prickly currant bush, swamp paperbark, Pomaderus species, some Banksias, Hakeas and tea trees are really common in that shrub layer and very important for the Helmeted Honeyeater. We can also see there the bracken, the saw sedge, sword sedge and other sedges that form part of their habitat. The shrub layer in particular is important because it provides really critical nesting habitat. We call that breeding habitat. The shrub layer also provides food, but it also provides really valuable protection to protect the birds from predatory birds in particular. Helmeted honeyeaters are reliant on a whole range of different parts of the ecosystem. So they feed on the lerps and psyllids that are produced by insects that you may have noticed on eucalyptus leaves that have fallen to the ground. You'll often see that they have little brown dots. This is the work of the psyllids. A large proportion of their diet comes from other insects and also manna from the eucalypts and other floral resources. There are several threats to the Helmeted Honeyeater. The greatest one of them is land clearing, and here we can see an aerial photograph of the Yellingbo area, and we can see that the corridors around the creeks and streams are quite narrow, and the adjacent land use has resulted in great amounts of vegetation being cleared. In particular, the shrub layer is largely absent from private property, although of course there are some landholders who have retained the shrub layer. All vegetation that is adjacent to these riparian areas is really helpful, even if it's not directly Helmeted Honeyeater habitat. It provides a buffer for those habitat areas. We also work on pest animals, trying to eradicate pest animals from the Helmeted Honeyeater habitat. This benefits, of course, the Helmeted Honeyeater, the Leadbeater possum, and many other native species. There are also some native predators. There's the bell miner, which will outcompete the helmeted honeyeater in many areas and therefore reduce the habitat for helmeted honeyeaters. And there are snakes and birds of prey. The birds of prey will predate on young helmeted honeyeaters and even older ones. There's been significant dieback of the swamp forest in the last decade or so. Here we have an image of the cockatoo swamp, and you can see that quite a number of those trees have suffered from dieback. This reduces the cover and the breeding habitat for the helmeted honeyeater, and it also reduces the amount of resources that are available to sustain the helmeted honeyeater populations. And fire continues to be a concern, with one population subject to fire in the Yellingbo area. It becomes a quite vulnerable population. So if we look now to the solutions for rescuing the helmeted honeyeater, we work with Zoos Victoria through their captive breeding program to help bolster the wild population. This helmeted honeyeater captive breeding program includes a really sophisticated genetics program that ensures that the wild population is being infused with genetic diversity that will help prevent extinction through inbreeding. Almost every day there are field assistants, field volunteers out in the field supporting and monitoring wild populations of helmeted honeyeaters. They're out monitoring their health. They're looking for any injuries. If there are injured birds, those birds are transported to Healesville Sanctuary for medical attention and then re-released into the wild if they're well enough to do so. And a huge part of our work is habitat restoration. Throughout the Yellingbo area, the Friends of the Helmeted Honeyeater and other agencies and groups have worked together to create vast amounts of habitat that had been historically cleared. The site at Burrangma Bick is an example of habitat that's being restored adjacent to the Wurriallic Creek, and another site adjacent to the Wurriallic Creek, in fact at the confluence of the Wurriallic and the Cockatoo Creek at Parslow's Bridge, has been supporting breeding populations during the breeding season, and this vegetation is less than 4 years old. The Friends of the Helmeted Honeyeater have an Indigenous plant nursery that supports our habitat restoration work, but it also provides Indigenous plants to the broader community and is a really, really successful social enterprise endeavour. And we're really pleased that we are able to produce around 90,000 Indigenous seedlings per year to bolster the habitat of the Yellingbo area. So the Friends of the Helmeted Honeyeater was founded, as I said, in 1989. We run our Indigenous plant nursery. We have habitat restoration as part of our main activities, as well as community education. We support monitoring and the supplementary feeding programs and support reintroduction of captive bred helmeted honeyeaters into the wild. We're also a member of many inter-organisational teams and programs. Big part of our work is community education and outreach. Much like this video, it's really important for us to be able to express the urgency with which we need to look after the helmeted honeyeater and also help people understand how it is that the helmeted honeyeater came to be on the brink of extinction. We work closely with schools and have a wonderful program called the Ambassador Program, which has been running for several years and really engages with children who get to come out for some excursions and learn a whole lot of the work that we do out at Yellingbo. Another core area of our work and the way that we support the recovery of the species is through private landholder engagement and also through our many collaborations and partnerships. As a result of all of this hard work, and it has been hard work, since 1989, the population of 50 wild birds has increased to around 230 wild birds. So we're thrilled that all of our efforts are coming to see such wonderful results. Looking forward, we really look forward to facilitating the Great Escape, where we support helmeted honeyeaters to move beyond Yellingbo and protect them from some of those issues that can arise from having one population in one area. And we look forward to your support as we continue to do our great work.
Thank you very much, Mel. That was very informative and interesting. We're going to throw to Dr. Dan Harley now, who's going to talk to us about the Leadbeater's possum. Thanks, Dan.
So my name is Dan Harley, and I've been researching and monitoring the lowland population of Leadbeater's possum at Yellingbo now for more than 20 years. This work forms part of my role with Zoos Victoria, which is really focused on developing conservation and recovery strategies for several of Victoria's most threatened species. And as with the Helmeted Honeyeater, Leadbeater's possum is listed as critically endangered. One of the key features is its restricted distribution. So the possum's entire range is confined to a 70 by 95 kilometre area. And this is made up of two distinct genetic groups. So we have Highlands Leadbeater's possums that people are most familiar with, and they occur in areas such as Marysville, Powtown, Talangi, Bawbaw. And then there's one small outlying genetically distinct lowland population at Yellingbo that was discovered in 1986. And so in this talk, I'm only dealing with that distinct lowland population. So a key aspect of the conservation of lowland Leadbeater's possum is the unique swamp forest possums inhabit at Yellingbo. Working with researchers at the University of Melbourne, we've just completed the first detailed description of the key characteristics of this forest type, and so I'll come back to those features later. And as Mel highlighted, the key threatening process for both lowland Leadbeater's possum and the Helmeted Honeyeater has been the historic clearing of floodplain forest from the valley floors, and that clearing has been driven largely. And in the Yarra Valley and Western Port District catchments, we really now have less than 1% of that valley floor floodplain forest intact. And so the outcome of that historic clearing is that other than at Yellingbo and some small sections of Bunyip State Park, we have no large patches of intact habitat within the known historic ranges of Leadbeaters and Helmeted Honeyeaters, all the way from Healesville down to Western Port Bay. And so that area is shown by the red on that map. And it is really that lack of habitat that is the key factor restricting our ability to recover populations of both species. A consequence of that historic clearing is that we now, as with the Helmeted Honeyeater, populations of lowland Leadbeaters are confined to a single locality, and that is Yellingbo Nature Conservation Reserve. And that represents a key vulnerability, as there's no risk spreading against bushfire. So we really urgently need to establish new populations elsewhere, but in order to do that, we require habitat. At Yellingbo, I've been monitoring the fate and the condition of each possum family now since 1996. And so each year we obtain multiple measures of how the population is faring. In June 2019, so the middle of last year, based on the monitoring data we had, our estimate was that there were just 38 lowland individuals surviving in the wild, which makes it one of Victoria's most critically endangered mammal populations. We've provided nest boxes throughout the entire reserve at Yellingbo to ensure that diurnal den sites are not limiting for the Leadbeater's possums there. And we also undertake extensive camera trapping surveys to keep track of where the possums are within these sites. So at the heart of our conservation strategy for this possum population are really four essential elements, and they are about really focused on increasing habitat availability, increasing the population size, increasing the number of populations, and also maintaining and trying to restore and elevate genetic diversity. And so we have recovery strategies and initiatives underway to address each of these requirements to achieving recovery success. For the possum's specific habitat requirements. So first of all, they're reliant on a good supply of tree hollows for denning during the day. Now, typically Leadbeaters are occupying quite distinctive types of hollows. They have a very small entrance hole and a very large internal cavity. And within that large cavity, the possums build these large nests of shredded bark where all the family members huddle and keep warm. The suitable tree hollows might occur in either living or dead trees. Those trees might be of either large or medium-sized diameter, and it's really protecting these trees, whether it be in reserves or on private property, is a key aspect to protecting the possums. These trees are also a critical resource for a whole host of hollow-dependent fauna, and so they are really an important wildlife feature that we need to try to keep and protect in our landscapes. The right types of plants must be present to provide suitable resources, both for lowland leadbeater's possums and for helmeted honeyeaters. Thankfully, there's a lot of overlap in what the two species use. In the case of leadbeater's possum, smooth or gum-barked eucalypts are really important. And in the specific case of lowland leadbeater's possum, that's typically mountain swamp gums or swamp gums. So they're absolutely vital food plant for this animal. And the best habitat is always characterized by a very high density of stems. And that is really important to facilitate the possums moving through the forest. They hate going on the ground. They're happy to be quite low down, but they don't actually like touching the ground. So they need continuous forest pathways to move through. And so it's an absolutely vital feature of suitable habitat. So in a floodplain in the Yarra Valley, that might translate into short periods of surface water following high rainfall events a couple of times a year. But letting that water spread and sit on the ground for short periods is really important, rather than us speeding it away via drains. Doesn't mean sites need to be permanently inundated, but just letting it stand and spread for short periods is vital. Finally, there must be an adequate area of habitat to support really what I think of as a viable neighbourhood of leadbeater's possums or indeed helmeted honeyeaters. Based on possum density, we require about 50 to 60 hectares of habitat to achieve to provide habitat for about 100 individuals. And for the helmeted honeyeater, it's about 25 hectares of suitable habitat to support 100 individuals. Now, importantly, that habitat can be spread across multiple properties. So there's really not reliant on one landholder providing it all. We can actually disperse it through the landscape. We've worked with ecologists at the Arthur Ryler Institute to create a habitat suitability model for these two species. And that is really to guide us and to try and attempt to try to identify the best parts of the landscape where we should be directing our habitat restoration efforts. These provide the best opportunities, I guess, to support populations in the long term. And then creation of those specific habitat requirements does ultimately require stock exclusion from sections of floodplain, but they can be quite defined and designated areas. So it doesn't entail people locking up, the entirety of their property. There needs to be specific attention to ensuring the right types of plants, the right species of plants are provided so that we provide those necessary food resources. And as I mentioned earlier, we need to make sure that when we're restoring habitat, we create these very dense stands of forest that are characterized by lots and lots of stems in close proximity. And that provides both movement pathways for the possums, but also really important nesting habitat for helmeted honeyeaters. In conclusion, really when I think about the long-term fate of these two species and whether our conservation efforts will be successful or not, the provision of high-quality habitat is the key. It's absolutely vital for us, I guess, to both expand populations in the short term, but ultimately too to ensure their persistence into the longer term. A major strength of the two recovery programs is that we have extremely strong partnerships in place among many stakeholders and agencies. And so we've got great opportunities to provide extensive support for landholders that are interested in participating in the program.
Thanks very much, Dan. That was really interesting and informative. We're going to throw straight to Gai Gadsden now, and she's going to talk to you guys a little bit about how you can do habitat restoration on your property and her experiences of working with private landholders. Thanks, Gai.
Hi, my name's Gai Gadsden. For the past 3 years, I've been working with landholders to increase and improve habitat for the lowland leadbeater's possum and the helmeted honeyeater, and all of the other wonderful creatures that we share this area with. I work for the community groups that are active in the area: Friends of the Helmeted Honeyeater, Johns Hill, Macclesfield and Monbulk Landcare groups. As you can see from this slide, there's still quite a lot of bushland on private land in this area, especially compared to other areas of rural Victoria. I'm working with landholders on 77 properties in this area who are all taking action to improve and increase habitat. Every property that comes on board and takes action completes another piece in this restoration puzzle. So how does it work? Well, first of all, I arrange a visit to the property, and then I have a walk around the property with the landholders and discuss how the landholders are currently using the land, their plans for the future of the property, what wildlife they enjoy seeing on their property, what things they're having trouble managing, and we talk about bushfire, flooding and drainage management. I provide advice and suggestions on what actions can be taken to conserve and increase habitat for our critically endangered species and other wildlife. I then provide the landholders with a plan of the agreed actions. The example in the bottom right-hand side of the screen is from a property on Macclesfield Creek. These landowners are conserving 1 acre of their 10-acre property for conservation purposes. Being on Macclesfield Creek, this area has got ideal habitat for the helmeted honeyeater and lowland Leadbeater's possum. So the sorts of things that we're doing here are in their established bushland, we're getting weed control done. And on the remainder of the acre, the landowners are going to stop slashing. In the northern part of that acre, there's a lot of local indigenous plants. And so we're not going to do any planting there. We're just going to let the bush naturally regenerate, seed and germinate itself. In the southern portion, it's just pasture grasses. So the landowners are going to be putting in lots of shrubs, those shrubs that the helmeted honeyeater and lowland Leadbeater's possum prefer. So once we've got the plan out and we've agreed on the actions, I then secure funding for any of the works. I also help to engage contractors and support the landholders to get the works completed in whatever way that they need help. One of the key actions that landholders can take for our critically endangered species is to revegetate the land that adjoins the creeks and along the floodplain. The revegetation may be planting part of a bare paddock or planting the preferred shrubs under mature trees, or allowing that natural regeneration to occur where the bush sets its own seed, germinates and recovers itself. Other key actions are for controlling the main threats to habitat, which are right across the landscape in this area. The deer population has exploded in this area over the last 10 years. Deers cause so much damage to vegetation, creek banks and wetlands. A fully funded program of control on private property complements the culling that Parks Victoria are getting done within Yellingbo Reserve. In the past 18 months, with those two programs, we've taken out 275 deer. So that gives you an indication of how big our problem is. The contractors also cull any foxes and rabbits that they see. Weeds are another one of the main threats to habitat in this area. So weed control keeps high conservation value bushland healthy and creates space for new local plants to grow. Most of the participating landholders have welcomed the fully funded program of contractor weed control. A lot of the landholders inherit infestations of blackberries from previous owners. And we also help people out with holly, which is a very difficult plant to control unless you have expertise in the area of weed control. And once we've got those infestations under control, the landholders then feel confident that they can continue to maintain them and keep them under control themselves. But landholders aren't just restoring and creating new habitat along the creeks and on the floodplain. They're also doing other actions further up in the higher parts of their properties that provide habitat for all of our different wildlife that occur in this area. Often landholders want to help the wildlife that they see and hear. So the wallaby that they see out of the window in the morning, echidnas, frogs. It seems that every different landholder has a different favourite. One particular landholder, I was talking to him about fencing out some casuarina, some she oaks that had germinated across his property from the roadside. And he was warming to the idea. And I mentioned that the she oaks are one of the primary food sources for the yellow-tailed black cockatoo. And he said, okay, we're definitely doing this. That's my favourite bird. So as you can see, people are interested in helping wildlife that they feel a connection with, as well as our critically endangered species. Fencing has been one of the most popular actions in terms of whole of property management, fencing to exclude stock from the magnificent remnants of bushland that are on private land, and fencing to exclude animals from dams. Dams and gullies, those wet areas of the property that don't provide good pasture. And they're very creative, the landholders, in coming up with ways that they can help wildlife. One landholder last season, controlled 38 European wasp nests along their frontage on the Wirialek Creek. And another family are using old apple crates from their dad's orchard in Sylvan to put over long-necked turtle nests to protect their eggs from predation by foxes. I found that many landholders want to do something in response to the biodiversity crisis. And my role is to make that as easy for them as possible. So if you live in this beautiful area and you want to help our local wildlife, then please get in contact with me on the phone number and or by email provided. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Gay. That was a really great overview of how landholders can plan and implement habitat restoration projects on their property. If you are a landholder and you happen to be outside of the area in the map that Gay showed, feel free to contact me and I will be able to help you out with some contact details of other organisations or programs that might be able to support you to do that kind of work. Before we finish up, let's just do a quick summary. Thank you so much for watching today. If you have any questions or would like to get involved, please feel free to contact me.